and welcome to slide pack 5 of the financial modeling program. What we've done in slide packs 1 through 4 is give you a very comprehensive overview of all of the steps involved in financial modeling, and what we plan to do now is go into detail on each one of those steps. So as a modeler, you wear multiple hats, but to be a good Excel financial model developer, you first and foremost need to have a reasonably good understanding of financial statements, the line items in financial statements, the logic behind the numbers, what drives the numbers, how those numbers can be derived, and things like that. The second thing you need to know is Excel. And actually need to know is an understatement. You really need to be someone who's very comfortable with Excel, is comfortable using help features as needed, can use very powerful features that Excel has, such as pivot tables, or the sensitivity analysis features, or the functions, or the fonts and formatting, or interlinking formulas across different spreadsheet tabs, and so on and so forth. So if you are a base level Excel user, I would highly encourage you to develop your understanding of Excel and take it to the next level. The other thing that is very important is you must be a good listener, because anytime you develop something, you have to understand what your stakeholders want. You have to listen to them and make sure that you can sort of sift through what they're saying to get to the crux of what your model needs to convey and what questions the model needs to answer. You also need to be a good communicator and a confident person. You need to ask clarifying questions to make sure that you absolutely understand what your stakeholders expect of this model that you're developing. So to become a good model developer, you must also know your math and be comfortable with simple things like addition and multiplication and where to use parentheses. It's a very minor point seemingly, but where you place your parentheses can make a big difference in the math or the answer that Excel gives you. You must be comfortable with things like something raised to the power of. So formulas like the NPV formula you should be comfortable with. So in addition to being comfortable with your math, you also must know how to bring your math skills, your finance skills, and your Excel skills and your communication skills all together into a model that is elegant. So when someone opens up the model, they sort of like the look and feel, and they feel like diving into the model. And this happens. There are models that you open up and you look at the first worksheet and you almost feel like walking away from the model. On the flip side, there are other models that you open up on a computer screen, and you say, my, this looks good. I'd love to dive into it and do more with this model. So, model elegance really sort of increases its adoption by your stakeholders. You have to bring it together in a comprehensive manner so that everything that they want is addressed by your model. Your model must be robust. It cannot break down easily. It must be easy to use. It must be something that is scalable. So let's just say you've projected out 5 years and someone says, I really want a 7-year projection. Or if you've projected out 3 years and someone says, I want a 5-year projection, your model should scale fairly easily and not break down. It must be modular. So if you want to add on a new module and have it link up to other data in your model, that should be doable. Or if you want to make changes in one module, that should be easily doable too. Your formulas must be transparent. There's actually an error checking reason for this also, because a lot of times we as modelers tend to make mistakes. And if the formula is open and transparent, someone else might say, hey, there's a typo in your formula or there's a change in your formula that you need to make. And moreover, if someone's going through your model and they see your formulas clearly and transparently, then they essentially have a lot more confidence in your model than if everything's blocked out and is more of a black box. So keep your formulas transparent. And your model must be flexible, and it should be able to perform sensitivity on key parameters, and you should be able to spin out graphs and pie charts and graphical information on the fly, such that if you change your data, it's nicely represented in a quickly redrawn graph or chart. So all of these things are very important in bringing a model together to the point where the stakeholders want to use the model. Now, there are many people who build models but do not know how to present them. And this is more true of models that are slightly complex. So, I say that it defeats the purpose of a good model. It does in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't, but it definitely lessens the impact of the model that you develop. So if you build a model correctly, and if the model flows correctly, you should be able to present it well. And I think that really contributes to making a lot more impact. And it also contributes to making your model a lot better accepted by the users. Now, a lot of CEOs or senior managers or stakeholders that expect you to build this model just rattle out their thoughts. A lot of these people do not have a lot of time. Quite frankly, a lot of them are not very good communicators. I mean, they may have other skills that got them to where they are, but we won't go into that. So a lot of times they will not express their thoughts clearly, perhaps sometimes purposely. And yet they'd expect you to translate that into a fantastic, fully functioning model. So make sure that does not put you off. Expect and be prepared for ambiguity in communication. A lot of people might say, can you add this, and can you add that, and can you do this? And basically they want you to do the whole world. Because it's not he or she or them that have to develop the model, it's you. And it's very easy to rattle off a long list of things without worrying about what your deadline is or what the budget is, etc. So realize that you're the one that's developing it. Take their input, listen to them, think your model through, but then be firm and say, look, here's our deadline, or here's the budget, or here's what this model needs to answer in terms of questions, and draw the line on what your model will and will not do. That said, of course, we all have to be flexible, and we've all got to incorporate input from our managers and our CEOs and our stakeholders. So, I'm not talking about being inflexible, but I'm talking about being clear about what the model can do, and drawing the line and convincing them that this is where the line needs to be drawn. And that's easier said than done. It's a soft skill that a good modeler definitely has. Now, model users will do unexpected things with your model. They'll stick in incorrect values. They'll stick in a percentage where they really should fill in a dollar amount. They might type in a word where they have to type in a number. Make sure your model flags their input errors and can handle all of this. There are others, such as your manager, who might just take a model and he might just want to play around with it. Obviously, they all think they are better than you are. And so, they might try to change it around. So make sure you always back your model up with something that you can go back to in the event that someone that you send your model to, or someone who comes onto your laptop or computer, changes things around and saves it. Make sure you have backup at all times. Now, things to keep in mind when you develop a model. What's the problem that the model seeks to assist with or solve? You need to have full clarity on the specific questions that your model needs to answer. So again, ask questions, understand the scope, and set expectations correctly on what your model can and cannot do. Get a good sense of the level of detail that people expect of your model. And it's also important to understand your business or have someone with you who understands the business and all of the variables and parameters that impact your business. So at the right time, discuss the various variables, the ranges of the values that these variables can take on. So for example, if you're doing a model where the discount rate matters, have a sense of what the right range for this discount rate needs to be. And similarly for all of the other parameters that go into your model. For quite a few people, working with paper sometimes helps them think better than just directly diving into Excel. More so in the initial stages of beginning to build out financial models. And there's nothing wrong with that. Do what you're comfortable with. If you need to take pen to paper, draw a flow chart on how you'd like the model to flow, chalk out the various parameters of your model, use your pen and pencil, and think of the graphs that you can make your model perform, because graphs and charts often show things in a visual manner more effectively than having to dive into numbers. So feel very comfortable with graphs and leverage graphs to your complete advantage. Know who's going to be using this model that you develop. Now, if you just join a startup, where nothing really exists, you sort of have carte blanche where you can set the tone for what the model's format will be, what it's going to look like, and things like that. But most established companies typically have an existing style sheet. They have an existing format. They have fonts, color schemes, layouts that executives and managers are used to seeing. So if that's the case, bringing out something that's completely new isn't generally the right way to go about it. Our advice here is stick with existing flows and formats as much as you can. And if you have ideas for improvement, suggest them, but be prepared to give up on a few, because people are resistant to change. And oftentimes, if you're in a large organization, you might convince your immediate team that this is a better format, but your model might get floated out to a bigger audience. And this bigger audience may be more used to sort of standard corporate style. So get a sense of who's going to use your model, who's going to see your model before you go about, changing things. Understand the capabilities of your model's users. Is this person more a communications guy, or is he or she more of a numbers person who's comfortable with the formulas? And accordingly, make your model more complex or more simple. Now, on certain things, so for example, with a valuation models are very widely used in the financial services industry, and their formats are more or less the same. So try and stick with the industry norm on how these models are developed. So here I talk about a DCF model. So DCF models typically tend to follow a certain logical flow. Go with that flow. Do not disrupt it unless you have something that is a very, very important change that you want to make. A few other simple tips. Excel worksheets, also called Excel tabs. Use them, name them, and use them from left to right, and make the model flow tab-wise from left to right. So when someone opens your model, they should open up your model on the very first tab, which is on the left-hand side, and they should logically progress through your model from left tab to the right. Now, A lot of people will want to go in and change numbers that they really shouldn't be changing. So for example, if there's historical income statement data, that is data that you don't want someone to go in and change. That's historical data. They may not realize that if your model's sort of ambiguous about that. So Excel has a very handy feature called the protect feature. Use this feature to disallow changes in cells that you don't want people messing around with. And Excel's also generous with fonts and color schemes and background colors and things like that. So use all of that to specify changes or parameters that can be changed and things like that. Now, when you open up your Excel sheet, before you start building in your line items or your time columns, etc., spend some time on the global settings of your Excel sheet. Standardize the font size, the number format, the decimal places format. So for example, some financial statements like the second decimal place. There are others that like no decimal places. There are date formats. So someone may like 0306 2011. Someone else might actually just like MAR-2011. So, understand what date format you want to use. Think about the size of your numbers and accordingly try and adjust your column widths. Think about cell alignments, just the look and feel of your model so that there's a consistency through all of the worksheets on your model. Now, use a similar scheme for your text and your number values. So, for example, US GAAP accounting tends to have numbers in parentheses that indicate negative values. Excel lets you do that. So figure out what you want to do. Another very simple thing, you have various descriptions on line items. For example, operating income. Decide, do you want the O capitalized, do you want the I capitalized, or do you want just the O capitalized? And just be consistent in making sure that the way you write operating income is consistent with the way you write gross profit or net income or operating margin or things like that. Because if there is a consistent look and feel, people generally just prefer a model that has a consistent look and feel. Likewise for dates, etc. Very important. Only one cell for one input variable. Never allow one variable to be changed on different sheets. Always refer people back to that one spot that they can use to change a value. Always, to the extent possible, avoid hard-coding numbers in your formulas. It's very tempting to say, let me not make a variable for something, let me just stick in 10 because it's almost always going to be 10. A lot of times someone might want to go in there and say, what if it's not a 10? And then it's more so with larger models. It's difficult to go through all of your tabs and make sure that you've fixed this 10 and made it something else. But it's so much easier if you can just go to a variable and change that one variable and have it flow through the model. So there is some amount of extra effort involved initially, but this extra effort really is worth it in the long run. So avoid hard coding numbers as much as you can. Do not overuse Excel's row and column hiding or row and column grouping. It just makes things sort of bulky and cumbersome and inelegant. If you have to, break your model up into more tabs, but let every tab be clean. Let users see all the rows and columns. Let them see the formulas. And the other advantage is, like I said, we all make mistakes. And if there is transparency, then someone else that's going through your model that doesn't have to worry about row or column grouping or hidden rows and columns, it's like having a pair of second eyes looking through your sheets. And if there is a mistake, always be very, very comfortable with acknowledging a mistake that you made and jump in and change that. It's very human. And people like it when you can say, I screwed up, I messed up, that's a mistake, let me go and fix it, and I'll get it right back to you. That said, if there are too many mistakes, no one wants that either. But if they see that you've done a really good job, you've really sort of put in energy into developing your model, but there are a couple of mistakes, fix them and move on. Now, sometimes, people like to have a formula or a number have a white font on a white cell background so that when they print it, that number does not appear. It's a quick and dirty thing. It may seem like the right thing to do at the time, but if you have to change that formula or if you have to do anything with it, sometimes you might not find it either. So, it's very tempting, like I say, but you yourself will be frustrated by this when you can't remember where you placed a certain formula. So I'd say avoid making text or formulas invisible to the extent you can. And that wraps it up for this slide pack. Thank you very much.